I want to share with you something that a student of mine is currently dealing with. Basically, he's working with his parish priest who wants to elevate him as protopsaltis and to actually take the place of the current very problematic protopsaltis at the parish. And I'll spare you the details, but basically, my student has found himself in a bit of a predicament. For context, he's at this big beautiful cathedral in Indiana. I don't want to give too many details, but this parish that's just receiving a lot of converts, a lot of new parishioners, and seeing, basically, from his perspective, seeing the current protopsaltis clear lack of practice and preparation before the services, which is really causing issues during the services, from what he has told me. He wants to turn things around and represent his parish in an honorable way, which is very admirable. And, but as he's telling me, there's a lot for him to learn, and it can feel overwhelming. And I personally know him to be very hardworking, a fast learner, very talented, and he actually played the trumpet with high level ensembles when he was younger, and he's used to having structured rehearsals, but now he's mostly practicing alone or with me. And because of that, he's told me he has a slight tendency to want to get to the end goal more quickly. And it's making it hard for him to learn what he needs to learn to be successful as a chanter. So, why am I talking about all this? Well, there's a very common tendency, one that I myself have experienced before, and that is to be in a hurry to get to the end result as quickly as possible, and in a broader sense, not really knowing how to practice correctly. So, this is what I want to talk about, how to practice as a chanter. In fact, I remember from my personal experience, I remember listening to recordings, and basically, I'd listen to the recording and I'd just want to go straight into chanting that hymn exactly as I had heard it in the recording, and to just go up and chant it in church. And unfortunately, that's not how things work. So, as you probably know, practicing is an extremely important subject for chanters because there's a lot we have to learn, and we need to learn it efficiently, and especially in the case of my student, in a somewhat timely manner. Especially if you're going to be having these responsibilities as protopsaltis. There's a lot that goes into chanting something. Not only do we need to understand intervals, analysis, and expression, but also vocal coordination in order to produce the sound that we want. And there's such a wide range of melodies that every chanter needs to learn, so we need to be efficient. And before we go any further, if you're wanting to work with me one on one to learn Byzantine music, to learn how to practice, for me to guide you through the process of learning and practicing, and especially for those of you who are busy and may not have time for an intensive study at the seminary or in Greece or whatever, but you still want to learn and you still want to learn the right way, the traditional way, I can help you. You can try a free online lesson, which you can schedule at, in a way that works for you. I'm flexible as to not only when you meet, but how often you meet with me. That's something that you can decide on your own because everyone has a different schedule, and I'm open and I'm flexible. And if you want to give this a try, you can schedule a free lesson, the link in the description of the video, and and in the pinned comments, you can give it a try for free. So anyway, how do you practice chanting? Well, I can tell you exactly what to do, but I'll tell you right now, you might end up quitting because it'll get boring. Um, that's what I did in the past because I got bored. So I'm going to tell you from the beginning that it's going to be boring, and you need to be prepared for that. You need to go into it ahead of time knowing that it's going to be boring. The process of learning is going to be boring. But if you stick with it, I promise you'll get results if you do it as I am telling you. If you do what I tell you to do in this video. So, the reason most of you are practicing wrong is because you're in a hurry to get to the final destination. And this is not how it works. For example, a bodybuilder does not go into the gym and pick up a heavy weight from the beginning and just start building muscle from there. There's a long process that you don't see. There's a long process of slowly building up the weight, starting at a very light weight, building it up. Then there's everything in between that you don't see: the diet, the recovery, the planning which muscles to work on and how to do it, and the working on your posture, and all these little in between details that seem irrelevant when you just look at someone who's really muscular, but they had to go through this process that you don't see, this very boring process. The same exercises over and over again. Another example: a software developer might have to spend um, hours doing tedious things to develop various components of an app or software before the final product is available. And then some of these components, some of these little details might even seem irrelevant to the final product. So there's a lot that we don't see. There's a lot of boring little steps, little details, and your chanting works exactly the same way. So how are we going to practice chanting in an optimal way? Here's how you do it. First of all, you have to go line by line. You can't try to chant a whole hymn all at once. You have to break it up into pieces, and you have to start with the first line. So find a hymn to work on. As far as choosing what hymn to work on, it depends on a lot of things. It depends on your skill level. It depends on your vocal range, and the degree of difficulty of the hymn you choose to work on. You need to be aware of what specifically you're trying to work on. For some contexts, you might want to challenge yourself, basically to learn something difficult, maybe to increase your range or to help with your vocal stamina. You can pick a difficult piece to learn. But sometimes, when you want to just establish or work on basic skills, it's easier to find something very simple to work on. So you need to keep that in mind as well. But you need to find something to work on, and you need to take it line by line. In other words, start with the first line, and within that first line, before the martiria, like you stop at the martiria, you need to take it piece by piece, because there's many things that need to happen in order to properly execute a hymn. So for example, you are going to want to do baralagi just to get the intervals correct. Make sure you're chanting the right notes. Then you want to look at the qualitative symbols. You need to look at the music in general and how to interpret it, and the analysis of whatever it is you're chanting. You need to spend time just working on that. And then we have the vocal production. That's a whole other thing, because you cannot express things the way you want to express them, or the way the music is telling you to, if you cannot get your voice to do what you want it to do. So you have to also train your voice. So what I'm trying to say is you need to take one line, and you're going to be like repeating one line over and over and over again to work on different things. And as I said, as you can see, it's a little bit boring, but this is how you do it. You can't just go through the whole hymn. So when it comes to like vocal production, you need to find out personally what you need to work on and kind of isolate that. Not in the sense that you can't really isolate one aspect of the voice independently from everything else, but in a way try to work on or focus on the thing that needs work. For you, it might be breath support. Maybe you're not breathing correctly. Maybe you have jaw tension. Maybe you are pushing too hard. Whatever it may be, you have to figure out what that is and you have to focus on that. Because that is what's keeping you, holding you back, where you cannot express things the way you need to. And it's good to record yourself. I have a video on how to record yourself and how to reflect on measure your progress based on recording yourself. And sometimes it's hard when you're just recording yourself on your own and you're just listening to the recording. It's hard to evaluate properly. Like sometimes you need an outside perspective. My students send me recordings. I listen to them. I give them feedback. If you can find an outside source, even if you know another chanter that you can send stuff to, that's really helpful to get an outside perspective instead of just relying on your own, how you hear it, because you could be missing things. So, what you need to do is you need to practice in this way, and that's when you're going to start to really perfect these skills through repetition, specifically repetition of the same line, the same phrase, over and over and over again. If you try chanting through the whole hymn at once, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be thinking about too many things at once. It's going to be too much all at once to be able to focus on the right things. You're not going to be able to focus on the things you need to focus on. This boredom and monotony, I guess we can call it, is what helps you to learn properly. So, once you can master one line, you can do it without any issues. You just move on to the next line after the martiria, and you chant those two lines together. And in this way, you move through the whole hymn. And when you do this, again, like I said, you need to think about what you're chanting and the hymn that you choose to learn, the hymn that you choose to practice should also serve a purpose in helping you in what type of skills you're trying to perfect. Everyone's at a different level. Um, even someone at a someone at a somewhat advanced level, if you're advancing, even those types of people may want to choose a very simple hymn if you're wanting to perfect certain skills that require um, a sort of repetitive simplicity. Maybe you don't want to choose a complicated hymn. But then on the other hand, if let's say you tend to run out of breath when you're chanting, you tend to not be able to chant long phrases. Well, maybe you do want to push yourself and learn a long cherubic hymn. Maybe you have trouble with high notes and going from low to high. Well, you need to push yourself. When I say push yourself, I don't mean force your voice. Again, take it line by line and figure out what's going wrong and focus on that. But in some ways, you do need to challenge yourself to pick some hymn to learn that forces you to overcome whatever these things you are afraid of, whether that be going from low to high or whatever. You need to be aware of that. At this point, when you are able to chant an entire hymn, you've done line by line and you want to try to chant the whole thing, you can shift your focus to other things, such as how you breathe. For example, when you breathe throughout the hymn. When we chant, we want to chant in a way that connects the notes. What a lot of people in the United States do is we have something we could call chanting in cubes, where we chant things as if on a piano, or as if in Western notation, reading it note by note. Um, and especially taking breaths in weird places, pausing. All of us do it sometimes. It's something to work on. When we chant, we want all of our notes to be connected. We want everything to flow in a melodic way, and we want each note connected. So, this is something to work on. When you breathe, we don't want to take breaths at random places. We want to take breaths at a martiria, or at a breath mark in the music. And you do this by essentially training yourself to hold your breath. And you say, I am not going to take a breath. You have to be careful how you do this, but it can almost feel a bit suffocating. I'm not saying to like suffocate yourself, but I'm just saying like it'll have this little feeling of like, oh, I really need to take a breath. And you resist the urge to breathe in random places. And of course, you also train your breath in many other ways. I have videos on this, how to strengthen your breathing. A lot of it involves holding your breath and releasing it in a sustained way. This is something to work on. And then another thing, see, there's various components you need to work on, and you can't just try to work on it all at once. This is the importance of the boredom aspect of just one line and repeating that line and seeing what needs work. Because there's a million, not a million, but there's a bunch of different things you need to focus on. And then finally you combine them. So for example, one other thing to look at is drifting pitch. In other words, going flat. Most people go flat. If you start pa somewhere, and then by the end of the hymn, your pa is way down. All of us do it, especially when we're in church chanting with someone doing the Yison and whatever. You want to correct this by practicing with an Yison app. Now, this is just to help you to not go flat, just to keep the same note throughout the whole hymn. That's another thing to work on. After this, you want to work on your tempo, basically, and you're going to use an online metronome, and especially slowed down. We learn hymns by slowing them down, 50 beats per minute, whatever, just like slow it down. So again, doing all of this at once is too much. You need to take it piece by piece. You need to separate these various things and work on them individually. And because you can't think about it all at once. And over time, what you're going to do is develop these skills and have them as second nature. So then when you chant something in church, all of these things kind of come together. And finally, what I like to do when I practice is that this final stage of practicing is I say, okay, I've been practicing this hymn. Now I'm going to pretend like I'm in church. What does that mean? I'm gonna chant this. This is especially important, by the way, when you're like leading a service and can't really take breaks. You need to chant it as if you're in church. What does that mean? It means chant through the whole thing. No pausing, no going back to correct something. You just have to chant it. No metronome, no Ison machine. Uh, you have to essentially pretend as if you're in church. And as a general rule, assuming that you chant in church the same way you would chant when you practice. In other words, don't change things. That's a temptation when you chant in church. There's like this temptation to start chanting differently, to push louder, so it projects. No, you have to chant in church the same way you chant when you practice, roughly, for the most part, so that it stays consistent. And if you do that, then when you practice, as if you're in the service and you record yourself, however you sound during this practice, is going to very much be similar to how you're going to sound in church, in the service. It's going to give you a good idea of how you're actually going to sound. Of course, in church, we'll have to add in, we'll have to account for a little bit of nerves that tend to happen, which are going to throw you off just a little bit, but not a big deal. So, in conclusion, practicing can and will be boring. But when you follow this method, when you do it, when you do things as I am explaining, you are guaranteed to get results. So, what are your thoughts on how do you practice? If you have any helpful tips, you can share in the comments and send this video to someone who you think would benefit from it.